Order, and if there's any declaration of peculiar interest, please state it now or when the occasion arises. First order of business is a motion which was provided by Councillor Barfoot at the April 26, 2008 meeting, and it states, whereas Grey County does not currently have a role in waste management, and whereas Ontario's proposed Food and Organic Waste Framework encourages municipalities to pursue regional approaches to address food and organic waste resource recovery capacity needs, including supporting resource recovery systems that build economies of scale for food and organic waste processing. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the staff be directed to bring back a report on the establishment of Grey County Task Force to look at options related to the implementation of a source-separated organics program. Put that on the floor. Councillor Barfoot, seconded by Councillor Mackey. Discussion. Yes, Councillor Barfoot.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Just, I think, maybe to repeat what I'd said at the Warden's Forum, the province's new position is that by, I think it's 2022, the province would like to see all source-separated organics banned from landfills. So it gives some time for the municipalities to do this. And as I mentioned, there are two facilities within Grey County, the one in Dundalk and the facility that's in Georgian Bluffs, currently owned by Township of Chatsworth and ourselves, are really two facilities that could look after that product. I think creating a task force within Grey County to investigate how a possible solution could be would be, should be something that we could look into and come back with that. So I would certainly, as I say, forward this motion that we create a task force and to look into this.
Well, thank you for that. It's certainly something that we have to look at. Councillor John McKean.
Thank you, through the Warden. And I'm fine with the forming of the task force to look at. I'm just kind of curious as to, how many municipalities in Grey County already do source separated organics, and how many of them use their own forces to do that, or how many contractors are involved in it. Because I see that in our case, we do have a contractor that picks it up, and one of the things I would think the task force would need to look at would be if they're already disposing of it or making use of it at another facility, as long as it doesn't impact the local municipality cost-wise. I think that's going to have to be taken into account by the task force, is to see, if we're going to, Councillor Barfoot has said, take it either to Dundalk or to their facility at Chatsworth. Maybe the other contractors already have a sale for it, so I would want the task force to look into that as to whether it would impact the municipalities that are already doing it financially.
Well, that's good input, and I think part of the job of working with staff will be to determine the terms of references that would explore those and probably result in, information going out to each of the lower tier councils to see what their ideas would be before we create the task force. But that's only a suggestion, it's not carved in stone. Any further discussion? Seeing none, is call the motion for approval. All in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried. We have next is item B, which is the notice of motion provided by Councillor Burley, and it states that the Committee of the Whole reconsider Resolution CC 31-17, specifically Clause 1. Is that 1.1? Yeah, specifically that the word amalgamated be removed, and Clause 2, that the sentence referring to the sale of Grey Gables be deleted from the resolution. Put that on the floor. Councillor Burley, seconder. Councillor McQueen. Getting it. All right, discussion, and I think our clerk would like to add some clarification before we take any questions.
I just wanted to provide council with just the procedural overview of this resolution. so that everyone has the same information, because I have had some questions over the last week about it. With the changes to our new procedural bylaw in January regarding reconsideration, the resolution to be reconsidered or part thereof has to be brought forward by a member who voted on the prevailing side. That has happened with Councillor Burley bringing that forward. It then comes forward to council for consideration. Previously, it had to be a 2/3 vote. It does not now. It just has to be a majority. It can be a recorded vote should someone request that. That is up to council members here. You are discussing whether or not to reopen this question or not. That's what you're looking at, is whether or not you're reopening the question. And it's specifically related to 2 items on there. Tara's actually going to bring up the entire resolution that was passed in last June, because there are sections of that resolution that cannot be reconsidered because they are already in play. One being the RFP has already been awarded to Sienna for management services. And the other was terms of reference for the Committee of Management, and the Committee of Management is fully underway now. So it is those 2 portions that are to be determined, and you're looking at voting on whether or not you're reopening that question or not.
Okay. Discussion, Councillor Burley.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I thought it was appropriate to bring this notice of motion forward today. We've received a lot more new information concerning long-term care. I'm a firm believer in trying to get the process to move forward. Right now, it's stagnant. It's not going anywhere. This is an opportunity to keep the process going, and I believe we should pick one battle at a time. I think we should open it up so we can have a real good discussion and look at the whole issue again. And that's why I brought it forward.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fosbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just to clarify before I comment any further, so to the clerk's comments, this is a straight vote, majority. If somebody chooses to call a recorded vote, it would then be a weighted vote. Okay, so I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. And to be as concise as possible, I welcome the opportunity for us to demonstrate that we are listening to the people who elected us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion? Councillor, well, I'll start here. Councillor Pringle, then Councillor McIntyre.
Mr. Warden, just a question for Chair Burley of the task force. Is this the position of the committee?
No, I'm not saying it is a position of the committee. We did have a discussion on it. We did have direction to have a staff report brought back to County Council, which Director of Long-Term Care did, was at our last council meeting. And now we're following the process that's before us now.
If I can continue, Mr. Warden, just some of the frustration is that we're not always getting all the information because of the committee, and a lot of it is closed session. So I'm just curious to know what the position of the committee is.
Well, I think Councillor Burley explained that there was a motion passed to explore a report from Sienna, which was done, and that was recorded and presented by our Director of Long-Term Care. So any further questions on that? Okay, Councillor Mackey.
Thank you, Warden. I guess a question through you to the chair. The information that was provided, I was unable to attend. I was out of the country, unable to attend the last county meeting. But the information from the Sienna report indicated that providing additional beds at Rockwood, there'd be a $1.2 million savings. I just wanted to make sure that that was correct information.
According to the reports given to us, that's correct. Yes.
And that would be an additional 28 beds added to Rockwood, making it a 128-bed facility, and then maintaining the status quo at Grey Gables. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct,
So
but
I
that's
think-
not up, that's not,
So I think it's
Yep, you're
a
right.
tremendous opportunity that the county has right now to make sure, one, to add additional beds to the, we know that the overall demographics, we're going to require more long-term care beds. We know from our research that long-term care beds,
Port order, we're into a discussion.
yeah. Gave an early, we have to stick to the discussion with relating to this.
so when do we get to comment, Mr. Warden, on that?
If it gets open.
If it gets opened up.
Yeah, if it,
Okay,
yeah.
I will-
All right, so, yeah, I understand, and
Thank you.
that's true. So, who else wanted to speak? Counselor McQueen, but be specific to this motion, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Warden and County Council. Certainly, the reason to look at this is already been spelled out. I certainly feel that for the future of Grey County and moving forward, a reconsideration, because I think, as the chair has indicated, new information has came forward with regards to when this decision was made last June. So I think it's only it's the proper time to bring it back, and in a sense to have that reconsideration of the new information that has been relayed from the province. I know I spoke to it a little bit of that at that time, but I think I certainly look forward to a favorable decision on this reconsideration to have further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further? Yes, Counselor Wright.
So now I'm starting to get a little confused. Just what are we discussing up here, Warden? This motion says to
This
me-
motion is changing that motion. The motion that is brought forward by Counselor Burley is to change the motion and changing specifically that the word amalgamated be removed, and clause 2, that the sentence referring to the sale of Grey Gables be deleted from the resolution.
And that's it.
That's it. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I stand corrected. Our
yeah.
clerk is
The motion that you're discussing today is whether you reopen
Yeah.
those two particular pieces. You're not,
Thank
this
you very
passing, if this resolution passes, that does not mean that amalgamated is removed or the clause relating to the sale of Grey Gables is deleted. It just, today just means that you're reopening that for further discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. Yes, you want, CAO should probably speak to this.
If I just add to that, and the reason why we've had to be more specific than we normally would is because some time has passed since we passed the original resolution, and some parts of that original motion are already in place. So we couldn't just say carte blanche, open the question entirely again, because some of those opportunities we no longer have.
Thank you. Well, I thought that we were just opening it to see if there was going to be opened, but then when all this other discussion started
Yes,
going
I
on,
understand what you're
started
saying.
wondering what we
Yeah.
were doing.
It's just open. Thank you. All right, any further other comments? Call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? 10 against. The motion is lost.
Thank you. Recorded vote.
Thank you. Counselor Burley asked for it. Thank you.
Okay, so if you're voting in favor, you're voting in favor of reopening the question. If you're voting against, you're voting against reopening the question. Just making that clear. Counselor Pringle?
No.
Counselor Mackey?
Yes.
Counselor Barfoot? No. Counselor Burley?
Yes.
Counselor McQueen?
Yes.
Warden Warden Halliday?
Yes? No problem.
Counselor Patterson?
No.
Counselor Hicks?
Nay.
Counselor Clumpus?
No.
Counselor Greenfield?
Yes.
Counselor Body?
No.
Counselor Wright? Counselor Fosbrook.
Yes.
Wrong one.
I think you forgot Counselor
Okay, I'm recording it here.
Woodbury.
Counselor Woodbury,
No.
Counselor McKean,
Yes.
Counselor Ardell,
Yes.
Counselor Eccles,
Nay.
Counselor Bell.
No.
Motion is lost, 3852.
Thank you. Move on. Okay, we have a delegation at 11:30, which we'll defer to later on in the, point 5 is the determination of items requiring separate discussion. The consent agenda. The motion on the floor will be that the following consent agenda be received and that staff be authorized to take action necessary to give effect to the recommendations in the staff reports and the correspondence be supported or received for information as recommended in the consent agenda. Put that on the floor.
Sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
yeah, so okay. Anybody want to pull anything from this list here? Sorry, I was supposed to ask that question first. From A through E. Councillor Fosbrook?
So again, to be clear, I have a couple of questions. I'm not looking to pull anything, make any motion. So do we have to pull just to discuss?
That's the rule.
That is proper procedure.
Alrighty then, so I'm going to pull item C, D, E. Yep, that'll do.
C, D, and E are pulled.
As far as you can go.
All right.
Anyone else?
Is there any other?
I was going to pull C as well.
All right, so anyhow, we've got C, D, and E, so we'll approve A and B. All in favor of that approval?
Should have somebody move it first, point of order.
Would you like to move, Councillor Eccles and Councillor Bell? No further discussion, we'll move with the motion for A and B to be passed through for consent. All in favor? That's passed. So we wait until later, come back on these? All right, at the end, we'll come back on these, all right? Okay, items for discussion that, pardon my early morning frog. The report HDR CW 0318 regarding a proposed transfer of Golden Town Residential Company assets to Grey County be received and that staff be directed to carry out the process to transfer such assets to the County of Grey. Put that on the floor. Councillor Patterson, seconder Councillor Body. Okay, discussion. Thank you. Anne Marie.
Thank you. Good morning, Council. I was asked to bring back some further information regarding the transfer of assets from Golden Town. The report does include some recent capital updates that have been done by Golden Town, an estimated 20-year capital estimate, and some timelines, looking at some timelines. Again, looking at the 109 units that are part of our complement of 1,251 units that are required under the Housing Services Act. So, looked at our process for assets. I just outlined a little bit of what we have done. We did have Golden Town provide an overview of the year-end of 2017 audit to Council on April 13th. I have listed their assets and their liabilities for you to review. We also looked at their operating funds, which is the annual subsidy paid by Grey County, and also their rental and other income. Facility staff worked with Golden Town to have a look at their building condition. In this is a list of the capital projects that have been recently completed by Golden Town. We also did, working with Golden Town, did a forecast for the next 20 years. It is noted that with the money that they currently have, along with the mandatory capital funds that the county provides every year, that there is a total at 20 years would be almost $3 million. The capital expenditures that we looked at or that we could see right now were about 1.7 million, and of course, these numbers don't carry any of the interest that would be made over those 20 years too. I did provide a link to the capital forecast with some of the items that we looked at, stretching out over that 20 years. And I'm also providing some future steps of what we would do next, looking at the furniture and equipment. Again, there would be another financial audit. There would obviously be communications with tenants, and we would look at any of the status of the tenants if there was any issues with regards to the landlord-tenant board, looking at our mortgage, what some of those costs might be. And I outlined timing for the closure, working towards that retirement of their board at the end of September. And I would be happy to answer any further questions.
Any questions? Councillor Fosbrook.
I apologize, I don't quite recall if the audited reports that were provided were in fact published. We had a presentation and they weren't there, and then we got them after the fact. Have they been made public?
Yep, they were listed with the meeting minutes under the attachments on the website when
Thank you.
the meeting minute went out a month ago.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions of, seeing none, we will call the vote on this for approval. All in favor? Great anticipation. Motion is carried. Thank you. Next one, Anne Marie will speak to it afterwards, that the report HDR CWO 918 regarding the province's proposed framework for a social housing modernization be received for information. Put that on the floor. Councillor Fosbrook, Councillor Ardell. Thank you.
Thank you. This is just to give council an idea of the province is moving forward with a social housing modernization. It's just at its beginning stages, but I wanted you to be aware of some of the changes that are going to impact housing. The province is looking at this because of a number of reasons. It was part of the province's long-term affordable housing strategy, and also through the Auditor General's report, there were quite a few recommendations that were made on how to improve our current housing system. So social housing actually accounts for about 23% of all-purpose rental built stock in Ontario. So it is a significant amount of housing that we're looking at. So obviously the province is looking towards wanting to sustain that housing stock and also provide a more comprehensive and a better system for people that are entering into social housing. If you look on page 47 of our package, it gives an overview of the modernized framework and the areas under that modernized framework that they're hoping to make improvements on. So the first one is a more coordinated access system. Right now, the county provides a wait list for all social housing, so that includes our 10 nonprofits and also our own housing. So right now, that wait list is based on chronological. So the date that you apply, it goes into a system, and we work down towards that list. The province right now is going to look towards a more needs-based priority list. We don't really know what that's going to look like at the time, but there will be consultation sessions. The province has recently, as attached in the letter, asked for information on our own wait list right now, so we are providing that. And there will be groups that we will be attending in order to look at what does a needs-based system mean and what does that mean for housing. Under that system too, it's also looking at other options such as a portable housing benefit, and are there any other opportunities for private rentals too. The next is they're looking at new approaches to financial assistance, meaning that there might be a benefit, a housing benefit coming down from the federal government, and what will that look like at the feds or at the provincial level, and also looking towards changing the way that we do our RGI. Right now, our rent geared to income is a very complex system, and I think it's going to move more towards looking at an income tax-based system. So that person is so it's based on what that person made the previous year. The next is the nonprofit sector. Right now, as I've told and that I've been saying in the past, there are a number of mortgages that are expiring in the next 2 to 8 years. Pretty much all of our nonprofit housing does, and most of the nonprofit housing in the province does. And at the end of mortgage, they do have that ability to not provide social housing anymore. So the province is aware of this, and they're looking at the possibility of an accreditation system. With that system, there would be a provider who would, have to provide be matched against some provincial-wide statements and provincial-wide policies and procedures that they would have to meet, and they would be eligible then for service manager funding, so our own funding and then funding from the province. We're not sure what that looks like or who's going to be doing the accreditation and what our role as service manager is. It's something that we are working and looking at very closely with the province because we do fund 70% of that housing, so we want to make sure that it's a system that will work for Grey County and for all other service managers too. So I just wanted to give you a heads up of those 3 areas. I don't really have timelines, but I know that they're hoping to have everything implemented by 2019.
Thank you for that fulsome report. Any questions of Anne Marie? Yes, Councillor Fossmer.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So the wait lists, is that public information?
It's not, because it's people's names and information like that. We do put our statistics are public. So for instance, the number of people that are on the list would be public, and certainly we have provided that information for others that were looking to build housing or looking to build a case towards housing. The wait list itself, the way it's set up, and the software that we use right now is very archaic, so I never feel that it's a good picture of what our housing need is. So I think we're all very happy that that system is going to change and maybe provide us with a little bit of a better picture.
Okay, thank you for that, if I may. So I don't think the province needs to know personal names. They
No.
just need to know statistics.
That's right, and we did provide them with that. They wanted to know how many people were on our wait list at a specific time, how many were seniors, how many were singles, that sort of thing, and we can provide that, and we have, and that's all they were asking. So I think they were just trying to get a better picture themselves of what the wait list looks like. We do report annually to the province on that.
So if I may, is the information that we submitted to the province public information?
What it was just so for instance, it was a database that we put information in. I don't have any way of recording it. So for instance, it would come up on the screen and say, click here for please enter the number. So we would put that number in. But yes, all of that information I can provide. It's public, and it's something that we can certainly share.
Thank you.
So it's there if you need it. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Anne Marie, as far as the waiting list, is there any way to jump the queue if you're in a higher need, like, for example, you're in a woman's shelter, or, there could be a variety of high needs that, is there any way to
Yeah.
move people ahead on the
There
list?
is. There's only one priority, and that is for victims of domestic violence. That is the only priority that does move you ahead, and there is a process for that. It's outlined in the legislation and the regulations, and we follow that process. But right now, that is the only priority. So maybe going to a needs-based system might look a little bit different. For instance, someone who's homeless, if someone needed to move for medical reasons, for treatment. So I think it might give us a little more options for people. At the same time, we have to be very cognizant of that family that maybe doesn't have some of those priorities but still needs housing. So balancing those in need because of a higher priority, but still that family that's in need financially.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you, Anne Marie. Good reports. Next up is Patrick Hoy, our Director of Transportation. And we're going to talk a little bit about roads this morning. So I'm going to put that report TRCW 2718 being a report containing the tender results for the municipality of West Grey request for tender WG 1806 be received, and that Moorfield Excavating be awarded the Grey County portion of the tender for a total amount of $840,860, excluding HST, and that the project deficit of 216,717.55 be funded from any surplus realized from within the 2018 capital construction budget, or if a surplus is not available, from the federal gas tax reserve. Put that on the floor. Councillor Barfoot, seconded by Councillor Pringle. Discussion. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. This report deals with the award of the Grey Road 4 construction in Durham. It was a joint project designed by a consultant and administered by West Grey. It involves the reconstruction of Grey Road 4 from Highway 6 to Chester Street West. And there's a map on page 57. Not shown on the map is a section that the town is also doing some pretty significant sanitary improvements on Bruce Street South, coming from that 90-degree intersection there. So the town is working within the same contract on that work, so we're each paying for our portions. But we're doing a little bit of tree cutting with our forces on this job to just save us some money at the start. We had 2 bids. The winning tender was net HST $855,000, which is a project deficit of $216,000. So $106,000 of that will be carried over to next year. We'll pave the top surface lift of asphalt next year. Just when you're doing that much underground, if something settles that you weren't expecting, you don't want to have to dig through 2 lifts of asphalt. 1 will suffice. So that's why we're saving that top lift for next year. Still seeing increased prices, increase in asphalt, granular materials more. There was some scope changes throughout the project that we weren't expecting. Just as we moved through the design project, there was some increased excavation in the road bed from some boreholes we did. It was just recommended that we get some of that material out of there because it was going to cause some settling problems. So the configuration at Lambton and Bruce Street remains generally unchanged. There's some minor improvements, some move back of the curb, some different line painting just to make it easier for trucks. Still going to remain a 3-way stop. Generally it's just minor improvements, but we haven't noticed too many operational problems there. The trucks are making the turn. And we recommend awarding to Moorfield for construction in 2018.
Yeah, thank you. Any any questions? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. More of a comment than a question, sir. To you, Pat, and your people in your office, Sharon, Matt, and everybody, I know that they've got along very well with West Grey, and this project has taken over a couple of years to kind of come to this fruition. We did receive a favorable tender, and thanks to you and your staff for working with West Grey to make this happen. Yes, that piece of infrastructure south of number 4 going towards Sadler Street, that's a big dig, and but I mean the speed which this has been awarded and coming together, I think congratulations to you for working so well with West Grey.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bell. Councillor Fosberg.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So given that this purchasing process was managed through West Grey, we used West Grey's purchasing policies and not the county's?
Well, it adhered to ours as well. This is typically how we would award a tender. So we had put a link on our website, I believe, right?
Yes, there was a link on the Great County website, and the tender was reviewed by both Matt and myself before it was released to the public to ensure that it did meet all of our purchasing bylaws.
Thank you for that. Page 2 of the report says Grey County will be responsible for the roadwork as identified in the Grey County Policy for Maintenance and Construction in Urban Areas. Is that a published policy?
It's a public document, I suppose. Yeah, it's not an agreement. It was a policy established by Grey County quite a few years ago when we took over some of the urbans. So, yeah, we could get you a copy of that policy. Yeah.
So to be clear, I'm wondering whether or not it's published, because I didn't see it listed on the website. So you have to ask for a copy of it, and it is available if you ask for it?
Yeah.
It's public, so if it's not on the website, we'll get you a copy. And
I would love a copy, yes, thank you.
thank you. And perhaps, it may find itself into our website as well. Thank you. Another question?
Yep, one quick question. So the third portion of this resolution relates to reserves. And so my question is, I know that the municipal auditor requires that changes to and from reserve accounts be accompanied by a council resolution. Is this resolution satisfying that need when it's still quite vague and not final? Will there be a subsequent resolution to meet the auditor's requirements that is more clear than this one as preliminary as I would describe it?
Thank you for that question. Kevin Wepler could comment on that.
These motions satisfy the auditor's requirements for transferring funds to and from reserves.
Use your mic, please, Kev. Use your mic.
Sorry. These motions meet the requirements of our auditor for transferring from our reserves, so.
So it's discretionary at the time, doesn't have to come back to council.
No, and I know the auditors pull all these when they go through the council minutes and stuff, when they're doing our audit and review these against
To review those.
what our transactions actually are, so.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor John McKean.
Thank you, Warden Halliday. Maybe Pat, if you could answer it, or maybe our representatives from West Grey could. What is the overall cost of the project, including the West Grey portion and the county portion? I'm just trying to get an idea of what the overrun is.
We don't look for any overrun. We do things very effectively and efficiently in West Grey. So when the cost comes in, we keep it right at that. The tender is 2.6, as you're seeing there. And the Grey County portion, 855, I think is what it is. So we're on the hook for about 1.8 with water and sewer work and the extension work, as Pat has said, down Bruce Street South.
Thank you for that information. Any other questions? Pat's up here. Okay, all in favor of that motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. Next one is report that Pat will speak to. That report TR CW 2818 be received and the County of Grey enter into road widening acquisition agreements to acquire properties for Grey Road 17 road widening and construction identified as Part 1 of Lot 21, Concession 20, Township of Georgian Bluffs, in the former geographic Township of Keppel, reference plan 16R-10973, and that Parts 2, 3, and 5 of Lot 21, Concession 19, Township of Georgian Bluffs, in the former geographic Township of Keppel, reference plan 16R-10973, and parts 13, 15, 17, and 19 of Lot 22, Concession 19, Township of Georgian Bluffs, in the former geographic Township of Keppel, reference plan 16R-10973. Put that on the floor, please. Councillor Burley, Councillor Greenfield. Your report, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. This report regards some land acquisitions on the upcoming Grey Road 17 job. I'd like to thank Jim, Matt, Dennis, and Lacey in our office, because if you look on page 62, 63, and 64, it was discovered the road wasn't in the right-of-way. It's quite a bit of a kind of a spiderwebby dog's breakfast there to figure out what land we were on, what we needed, what we owned. Very confusing. They worked quite hard at it, dealing with the property owners who were very agreeable. Figuring out what we needed, and the design was going on that Dennis was completing at the same time. So a lot of staff work went into this, even though it's not a huge number of $42,000 to get all these properties straightened out. We wanted to make improvements on that curve. There's kind of a funny dip in there, and just wanted to kind of bring it up to standard. So we just needed this land to do it. There was land we didn't need on the green, you'll see on page 64. There was land that we owned that we didn't really need for the new road. The current owners, or the current abutting residents, weren't interested in buying that land from us, so we're still keeping some pieces there, which is fine with us. So, but basically this is just about finalizing the agreements from 3 different property owners to buy all these little slivers of land that the road was already on, so.
That's good, cleaning up as we move forward on projects. Any other questions of seeing none, all in favor of this motion? That motion is passed. Okay. Thank you. Who's going to speak to the, I guess, okay. Number E will be that we'll put on the floor that all written and oral submissions received on official plan amendment number 141 were considered and helped to make an informed recommendation and decision, and that addendum to report PDR CW 0318 be received, and that the amendment number 141 to consider amendment to the County of Grey official plan on lands designated agricultural, rural, and hazard lands to permit a lot addition of 4.8 hectares to the neighboring lands to the west, and for the lands described as Part Lot 8, Concession 5043836 South Great Road 4, Geographic Township of Vergamont, and the Township of Southgate be supported, and a bylaw to adopt the county official plan amendment be prepared for consideration by council. Put that on the floor. Yes. Councillor Ardell, Councillor Barfoot. Is any discussion? Yes. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome. Go ahead, anytime.
So this is addendum to report PDR-CW-03-18, file number 42-07-060-OPA-141. So the subject lands are highlighted in red, and to the left are the lands to be enlarged, and to the right are the lands to be retained. So currently, the lands highlighted in yellow and the lands highlighted in red currently are one parcel, and we're looking to, the proposed application is looking to sever the land highlighted in red and being added to the lands in orange to the left. This subject property is around 3.3 kilometers east of Mount Forest. Currently, the subject lands, so the retained lands, sorry, this is a bit confusing to explain here. So the retained lands in the yellow currently are 10.9 hectares, and the lands to be enlarged currently right now are 13 hectares. And so the result of this application would add the lands to be severed, which are highlighted in red, and that's 4.8 hectares. They would be added to the orange parcel, and that would result in the addition, so that the orange parcel would then be 17.8 hectares, and the retained parcel would be 6.1 hectares. Currently, the lands are designated hazard lands, rural, and agricultural. So the rural and hazard lands are where the lands are to be severed. There's no agricultural lands that will be severed as part of this application. So the proposed land severance for lot addition would permit a lot addition for lands designated agricultural, rural, and hazard lands. Amendments are needed to the county and township official plans, as well as a township zoning bylaw and a consent to sever. An amendment is required for agricultural and consent policies where minimum farm sizes are generally less than 40 hectares. And lot additions are also discouraged in agricultural lands unless the severed and retained parcels maintain a lot area of 40 hectares or more. Neither the retained parcel, 6.1 hectares, nor the expanding adjacent property, 17.8 hectares, will comprise of 40 hectares, and a severance from the original Crown parcel has already been provided for in the past. So just returning here to the initial image, if you guys can take a look, there's currently the Saugeen River that abuts these properties to the south, and so those lands have been, they're recognized as separate parcels as of right now, as a natural severance because of that land feature. As well, if you take a look, there's significant woodlands and hazard lands that are in the subject lands to be severed, and there's a tributary of the Saugeen River that travels up through where the hazard lands are denoted on this map here. And so in order currently, as is right now, in order to access the lands to be severed, the current property is accessed by traversing through the lands to be enlarged along Southgate Road, number 4. So with respect to public and agency comments, there were no comments received from the public on these applications. Agency comments were received from Historic Saugeen Métis, Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, and Township of Southgate staff. And there were no outstanding concerns from the circulated agencies and stakeholders. So the planning analysis here, planning justification was submitted in support of the proposed official plan amendment and lot addition. Surrounding the subject lands are woodlands, the Saugeen River to the south, and a tributary of the Saugeen River located on the northwesterly corner. Lands on both sides of the Saugeen River are legally viewed as separate parcels. Approximately 4.8 hectares will be added to the neighboring property to the west, and no new lot would result from this lot addition, which is consistent with provincial policy and conforms to the county plan. The lands to be severed are approximately 3.8 hectares, and these lands consist of hazard lands, and 0.39 of these lands will be rural. Therefore, no lands will be designated agricultural are being conveyed to the adjacent property owner. Furthermore, the reason for this lot addition is to increase access to the rural portion of the subject property for farming purposes. Due to the large forested area and hazardous lands on the subject site, access to the 1.4 hectare field can only be achieved by traversing the adjacent property to the west. As there is no proposed change in land use or construction of buildings and structures, the SVCA determined by the very nature of the application the impact on the woodlands and wetlands the Saugeen River would be negligible. The proposed land severance would not hinder future aggregate extraction as the current size of the lands are not farm sized. I currently don't have a map of the aggregate lands on these properties, but as mentioned, the lands aren't farm sized, so it wouldn't be viable to have any sort of aggregate operation on these lands in any event. And as well, the proposed official plan amendment application is consistent with provincial policy and conforms to the goals and intent of the county official plan. As well, we have further policies that speak to agricultural lands in the OP, and the general intent is to protect the primary way of life and the viability of these lands. And so through this application, it would inherently encourage the sustainable access to this property if subject lands were sold in the future for farming purposes. So through recommendation of this application is such that all written and oral submissions received on official plan amendment number 141 were considered and helped to make an informed recommendation and decision. And that addendum to report PDR-CW-03-18 be received, and that amendment number 141 to consider an amendment to the County of Grey official plan on lands designated ag, rural, and hazard lands to permit a lot addition of 4.8 hectares to the neighboring lands to the west for the lands described as Part Lot 8, Concession 5, Geographic Township of Egremont and the Township of Southgate be supported, and bylaw to adopt the county official plan amendment be prepared for consideration by County Council.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Questions? Councillor Body.
Thank you. Looking at the aerial photo, this looks like we're just correcting what is possessory or been in practice for years. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, that's correct.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Councillor Fossborough?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. When we're dealing with an official plan amendment, is this something that goes through the Planning Advisory Committee, which has been rolled into Economic Development and Planning Advisory?
It's Randy.
I can speak to that. No, the terms of reference for the Economic Development Planning Advisory Committee doesn't comment on individual applications. Primarily, the role for the NPAC on planning advisory matters is discussing around things like the official plan, policies, or any strategic project or studies that the planning department's working on.
Thank you. Further question?
Yeah, just one other question, and I raised this at the public meeting. So I took the opportunity to drive by this property looking specifically to ensure that there was a sign posted to provide notice. The sign was not posted at the civic address where I might have expected to see it. It was posted on the corner, which was explained is relevant because that's the part to be severed. So I understand the rationale, but in the interest of making sure that, we have a consistent process, and I also want to raise the issue of whether or not we're going to be looking forward to any update to Grey County planning notice signs, because I've noted that they could be better. So hopefully that's in the works as well.
Thank you for that comment, and we're taking notes on that, so thank you. Any other questions? I see no further questions. All in favor? Motion is carried. Okay, are you up for the next one? What? Oh, Mr. Bartlett is requesting a timeout? Yes, thank you. Yeah, we'll give you extended 5. Thank you. Back to order. And Barb? Back to order. Arlene? Okay. We're going to put report PDR CW 1718 be received, and that the application for a minor exemption under county's forest management bylaw for lots 38-40 concession 2 south of Durham Road SDR and lots 45-45 concession 3 SDR in the geographic township of Artemisia, municipality of Grey Highlands, be approved. Put that on the floor. Councillor Wright, Councillor McKean. Scott, are you going to speak to this? Marva Farms Limited. Thank you, Scott. Welcome.
So thanks, Warden Halliday and members of committee here. So what we have before us is a minor exemption application, and just as a bit of a refresher here, because we don't deal with these too often, we have a few different applications that can be applied for under the county's forest management bylaw for the removal of trees. The one we see most frequently would be a selective harvest, and in those cases, those applications don't come to council. But we do see the odd minor exemption application where they are looking at clearing a section of trees. And in the case of a minor exemption, we do circulate to neighbors and agencies, and we also bring it back to council for council's approval here. So we'll just get into it. In this case, we have a proposed application that came forward a few years ago, originally for 39 acres of tree removal, and they were looking at approximately 12 acres of removal of pine plantation at that time, as well as 27 acres of a more natural mature growth. When we initially went out to circulation on this, both the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority and our county's forest management bylaw officer, Lee Thurston, raised some concerns with the level of clearing being proposed. At that time, they stated the objective of the clearing, and you'll see it a little better here on an air photo in just a second, was to better connect some of the farmable portions of the property, if you will. Based on the recommendations of Mr. Thurston and Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, it was recommended that an EIS be completed. And when that EIS was completed, they came forward with a drastically reduced application. So rather than 39 acres of tree removal, it went down to about 3.2 acres of tree removal. But it still allowed for some connectivity between the farmable portions of the property through the installation of 2 laneways that would connect farm fields. So I'll just go on to an air photo here. What you can see on the screen there is the subject lands. We are talking about a very large piece of land, approximately 760 acres. It's about 1.7 kilometers southeast of Proton Station, so it's in the greater Proton Station area, if you will. And what you'll see is the 2 pockets of land as they were originally proposed, the larger sizes, and you can see, especially the one sort of in the center of your screen there, would have connected those 2 arable pieces of property quite well. What's actually come forward after the environmental impact study was completed is these 2 little narrow blue strips, which will still allow for laneway connections, but what you can see is a significant reduction in the amount of trees actually being removed. When we circulated this to neighbors, there was no concerns raised from the neighbors. We also got comments on the revised proposal from Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, the municipality of Grey Highlands, and our forest management bylaw officer, and all are now in support of the proposal. As such, county planning staff are recommending approval of the revised proposal in this regard. And Warden Halliday read out the motion at the beginning, but it would be basically to approve. I would be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Any questions of Scott on this particular? Yes, Councillor Eccles.
Scott, the two laneways obviously are considerably, one looks like a little trail and one looks like, I don't know, an extension of Gray Road 40 or something of that size.
Get a river there?
I guess, what's the reason for one so wide if they're moving heavy, I'm taking it, it's assuming it's moving heavy equipment in, and the other one seems to be narrow? Just
Good
curiosity.
It's a good question. The laneway in the center of the screen there does look more rudimentary in terms of just a path from one field to the next. The laneway in the south is perhaps a bit of a misnomer to call it a laneway. The original proposal there, as you can see on the screen, was to try to take out more of the trees there, maybe to add some more arable land. They haven't stated a reason for why they need sort of the revised proposal and the wider laneway. Like, I don't think they're four-laning it or anything. But the EIS has recommended that it's safe to do so there, and our folks, including the Conservation Authority, haven't raised any concerns. You know, if pressed, could they get by with a smaller laneway? Perhaps. But from an environmental perspective, there was no concerns with the wider one in the south.
That answer your question? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Fosberg.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Thank you for the information, Scott. What can you tell us about the enforcement of these initiatives?
Sure. I can tell you that our enforcement works kind of on two perspectives. One is if we get a complaint, then Lee goes out and actively investigates any complaint for tree removal. And those calls and emails do come in for sure. You know, my neighbor's cutting down trees, what can I do? Or my neighbor's threatening to cut down trees, what can I do? Is another one we get. And the other one that we investigate from time to time is in Lee or county staff's travels through the countryside. If somebody sees something, we come back and check and see if there was a permit issued. So no doubt we don't catch everything. There's trees being removed across the county that perhaps don't have a permit, but based on the resources available to us, Lee's pretty quick in acting and in investigating these scenarios. There are times when he finds somebody that's in the middle of tree removal and they don't have a permit, and they cease operations and apply for a permit. And there has been one or two times when he's made them aware that they are to cease operations, and they haven't ceased, and that brings about another process. The county does, for large tree removals, prosecute where it's an infraction against our bylaw, but that's the last resort, and we don't jump right to prosecution in that regard.
Thank you for that. And if I may, just briefly, so if somebody's in the process of removing trees with a permit, I think we've talked about this before, are they required to have that permit visible from the road for anybody who's wondering, do you have a permit? Is that how that works?
Yes, they are. And actually, another initiative we're working on with our GIS staff, and it won't be ready immediately, is to try to develop a mapping site which would show where those permits are. That would help both internal staff as well as Conservation Authority staff, as well as maybe the public, to say that, you know, listen, you know, I'm concerned my neighbor's cutting down trees. I can go to the site. Oh, by the way, they have a permit. Or, oh, they don't have a permit. I know when to make that call or email. So our GIS staff are excellent at always trying to push us to come up with more initiatives to better serve the public. And this is one that I think will be a great partnership when everyone gets around to completing it.
Great, thank you very much.
That's good. Good future thinking. Any question, Councillor McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Warden, to Scott. Just a quick question in the sense of what constitutes, I guess it depends on the mapping with regards to our significant woodlands. But there are places where people plant trees for landscaping purposes or Christmas trees. Sometimes they get a little wild, they go where does is it, if it's mapped significant, or is it like a crop tree, or like I know we had one a few years back where there was Scotch pine that a number of them were dying. It was in a wet area or something like that, and it just, they weren't like a long-term tree type thing because they, of whatever reason, or they got blighted. Is there some leeway there in the sense of what, because obviously you call it second growth, so obviously all the trees were harvested across this country at one time. So the second growth is your hardwoods and whatever. Can you just sort of shine a little bit of light there?
Sure, certainly. And this is where there's some confusion in county documents currently, in that we have a forest management bylaw, which traditionally was separate from the planning process in any way. And then in 2012, we added significant woodlands to our county official plan. So the forest management bylaw contains a definition for what constitutes a woodland in that regard. And it has to do with the number of trees and the size of trees per hectare in that regard. Versus the county official plan sets its own criteria for what constitutes a significant woodland. So one of the important procedures that we're going through in Recolor Gray is to try to better marry those two documents. And I suspect out of Recolor Gray, we'll also see some updates needed to our forest management bylaw in that regard. In both cases, we've tried to consider exceptions where trees were planted clearly with the purpose of future harvest or for agricultural purposes. So the notable exceptions there would be if you've planted pine trees for a Christmas tree farm, then you have to be able to harvest those, otherwise it's kind of useless. Or similarly, if you've planted trees for an orchard, then and the trees age out of production, we want you to still be able to take down those trees and replant and everything else. So we are trying to make sure that the exceptions in the bylaw and in the official plan speak to that in that regard. We have heard through the Recolor Gray process that maybe in the official plan, which again is separate from the bylaw, we need to consider wording which speaks to plantation forests versus more naturalized forests. The challenge there that we're struggling with, but that we're going to try to find a way through, is that a plantation can become a naturalized forest with time, but sort of what is the criteria there? And do we say, after 20 years, after 25 years, versus, someone being triggered as a significant woodland immediately? So we're not totally sure how that's going to read, but we have been trying to put some revised wording in there to give some consideration to those plantations, such that they wouldn't be treated the same as say, a 150-year-old natural forest, if you will, even though our natural forests are plantations at one time in many cases.
Follow up that to Mr. Warden. So I've seen just on certain spots this winter where there's been, I guess, softwoods harvested because of the density. They clean out half of them. They're thinned out, I guess, for pulpwood or whatever. But obviously, those remaining trees are going to be lumbered trees, and with a significant forest where it's a naturalized forest, you take the big ones and leave the small ones. But in those type of situations, they're all the same size. So at some time, they're all going to be harvested, because right now I've seen it where they've taken out every other row. So then it's because of the density, they're all struggling and they're not surviving or whatever. They thin them out, but eventually the rest will be harvested, because that's the intention. It's a managed process. So then when they all get harvested, then what? Because they're all gone. Is that an exception to that rule, or they come to the point where somebody decides, I'm going to harvest them now because they were planted for the sole purpose at one time of being harvested? And just as a side, sometimes landscaping and maybe a Christmas tree at one time had intentions, but then when people do that, did they have to register that they're planting it for the reason? Because all of a sudden property changes, and all of a sudden there's sort of a mix match. Half the trees are gone, half the Christmas trees were cut out, there's spaces, anyway, I guess there's a lot of, I can see that it's not an easy task, that's for sure.
Yeah, just in response to that, the bylaw does promote sustainable forestry practices, and the bylaw contains a number of exemptions which aim to make it easier on farmers or those that do want to sustainably harvest. And the hope is that, when somebody is looking at thinning out part of a bush in that regard, is that they would selectively harvest, and that would help maintain the overall health of the forest in that regard, similar to our county forest where, we're on an approximately 15-year cycle such that, each 15 years we do a harvest, but in the interim, new growth comes up as well as some of that existing growth matures a little further. So for the exact proposal that you've referenced whereby, it sounded like you harvest half at one time and completely clear at another time, when you come back in for that clearing, if it still meets the definition of a woodland, you might need the minor exemption process here. But the hope is that we could work with landowners to say that, if you selectively harvest over time, you'll have income over a long period of time, and the forest will be healthy, and other natural functions will also prosper in there. And so that's the goal. We do see, especially a number of years ago with the increase in commodity prices, more pressure on clearing lands for farm purposes. And there are cases where we've allowed that, but there's other cases where, in working with our conservation authority and our bylaw enforcement officer, we've tried to, as in this case, minimize the number of trees being taken down. Your comments with respect to, registering Christmas tree farms, that might be something that we need to look into with a bylaw update in the future. There has been some confusion in the past where, there was a historic Christmas tree farm, if you will, and it had been kind of left to go a little natural, and someone went into harvest. So it might be something that we could look into in that regard. It's a great suggestion.
Good discussion. Thanks for your sensitivity to that, Scott. Councillor Eccles.
How consistent are the authorities across our area? I mean, our official plan, our tree cutting with the interpretation from conservation authorities to the NEC. It would be great if we could have it consistent. To Councillor McQueen's comment, we go to one agency and they interpret it as something, as a natural forest, and there's no consistency between what is forest land out there. Any comment on, are we working with those other commenting agencies and authorities to get something that is consistent for the general public to understand? Sure.
We are working with the conservation authorities and the Niagara Escarpment Commission on the update to the official plan, and looking at what's a balanced approach to the significant woodlands policies. We do have significant woodlands across large parts of the county, and I think there is the recognition that not every tree is going to be saved in that regard. We haven't had those explicit discussions on exactly what constitutes sort of a natural forest, if you will. It's something we can look at further. I know in working with our two primary conservation authorities in terms of the Saugeen Valley and the Grey Sauble in that regard, on these minor exemption applications or even under development applications under the Planning Act, I would say their staff are fairly consistent. They apply the policies liberally in that that not every significant woodland comes with a full required environmental impact study. There are lots of times when minor tweaks can be made to that woodland, if you will, without the need for further environmental study, and the Conservation Authority will often identify building envelopes on site. The Niagara Escarpment Commission has maybe a little stronger mandate in that regard, and they tend to be a little bit more restrictive. We haven't dealt with a minor exemption application within their boundaries, but even within the Niagara Escarpment Commission area, we do see development permit applications whereby there's modifications made to the woodlands, and they're certainly not viewed as a development prohibition, but I'm not sure we have one clear definition in the sense that you were referring to.
Yes, comment.
And I guess in West Grey, one of the things that tweaks that, when we went for the expansion, the urban expansion of Durham, quite literally, it was a line fence row was by the Conservation Authority designated as a natural forest. And individual sitting beside me can probably say that he had more time going up and down that fence row. And that's where it, anyways, we got around it, but it was just the fight to get around it. But it was in that consistency. What is natural? I think the city of Owen Sound on the east expansion out there, you know, where is the forest and what is a tree?
In that regard, you may be pleased to note that through the official plan process, we've updated the significant woodlands, and in a lot of cases, we've taken out those fence rows or those slivers. Not to say that we've taken out the trees, we've removed them from the significant woodlands mapping. If somebody chooses to keep the trees, they're certainly encouraged to. But we did have some situations like that based on how the lines were originally drawn. There was a case in Grey Highlands where a gentleman had a very nice long driveway and he happened to have one row of trees on either side. And it acted almost like a barbell in terms of it was connected to two larger pockets, and so therefore he was significant. The intent certainly isn't to protect every little row of trees or individual fence line. There are cases where larger, wider fence lines may become significant from an animal movement perspective, but individual rows of trees, those are generally being cleaned up in the mapping. And I must say, it's us that generated that mapping, and so we're to blame, not the Conservation Authority here.
Good education for everybody. Thanks, Scott, and you're sensitive to that. Yes, Councillor McQueen.
Just an update with regards to the NEC. It was brought up, as I understand, Scott, that logging and because we have our bylaw for tree cutting on lands in the escarpment, that the NEC does revert back to the Grey County bylaw, as I understand, for tree cutting.
I know they certainly do with respect to our significant woodlands. I must admit I'm not as clear on the bylaw itself, but we could certainly look into that.
Sort of what I've been told at the
Okay,
NEC,
perfect.
that they respect, they don't get into, if somebody's doing a woodlot tree cutting through our county bylaw, because our county bylaw covers the whole county, they certainly rely on the county's bylaw to control the tree cutting and all that with regards into the NEC land. So I think it maybe needs to be clarified a little bit more, but they do allow tree cutting in the escarpment lands. So that's the thing, is for information, people don't realize that, but as I understand that they don't get involved with a development permit for your cutting of your tree and stuff. And I know other circumstances, they also, sometimes for your tax portion to get, if it's a significant woodlot, you have to do a tree management plan to qualify, I think, for taxation purposes too, so.
Okay, Councillor McKean has a comment or a question?
Yeah, I just have a comment. It's been great discussion, but I just wonder if with the amount of interest from county councillors on this, maybe we should just have a workshop, because the last few minutes, I really fail to see what it has to do with this particular recommendation. In fact, I would ask if you call the question.
Well, thank you for that. I felt that it was good education for all, Councillor McQueen. Scott, do you have something that is pertinent to?
I'm almost afraid to ask the question after Councillor McKean's comments, but
he's calling the motion.
I think, a workshop would be important. One comment that Scott made, do I have the? No, okay.
No, you don't technically, so I just wanted to see. Yeah, no, it's fine. It's okay. We'll call the vote now. We've had good discussion, and all in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Scott, for handling that.
Point of order, Mr. Warden? Just to clarify, when somebody calls the question, I believe we're supposed to take a vote to agree if we want to call the question.
I'll ask our clerk for clarification on that.
Councillor Fosberg is correct. It is a 2/3 vote on calling the question. And if the question, the motion to call the question is passed, then the question is called. If it's not, then discussion continues.
Thank you for that education.
Thank you.
We all learned something there today, and you learn by driving the car, I guess. So anyhow, I thank you for that. Yes. So the next item that we're going to switch to It's 5 minutes early, but I see Mr. Ron Kerr is from Burnsides is here. Is he prepared to make his presentation now at 5 minutes early? Yes, he's acknowledged that he's willing to make that presentation. Welcome, Mr. Kerr. Welcome. Tara will work with you on the slides. So
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
Some of these slides, these are the actual slides that will be presented at the Public Information Center, which is be held in June in Town of the Blue Mountains. The study is regarding the corridor of Highway 26 between Gray Road 19 and Gray Road 21 in the Town of Blue Mountains, otherwise known as the Craigleith area. And what we're looking at is, so some of these slides have a great bit of detail on them. I'll try to zoom in on them if necessary so that you can pick up the detail where necessary. The study area is defined, the area in white here with the border from Gray Road 19 on the west over to Gray Road 21 on the east, and following the Highway 26 through that area. The area shaded in white extends further south to incorporate the proposed development that has been proposed in the Town of Blue Mountains, which is in various stages of approval. Some is at draft plan stage, some is still just conceptual, so we're trying to take into account the growth. So what we're looking at, the purpose of the study is to address the transportation issues related to the growth of traffic, just through background traffic growth and through the development growth in this area, and looking at not just the vehicular traffic, but also pedestrian and cyclist movements in the area. So there are a number of studies that have been ongoing and are continuing and will take place in the future. To the left of this slide, the two studies that we participated in were completed last year related to Gray Road 2, the intersection of Gray Road 2 right at Thornbury, and the intersection of Gray Road 40. So that's the green box here and the blue box on the left, and these areas of Highway 26. Those studies have been completed, and at this stage it's up to the town, the county, and the MTO to determine how they will be implemented and at what time. A third study that's been completed was along the whole corridor for basically rehabilitation of the surface of the road and the drainage. That work was completed, I believe, in 2017. And there is another study that has been completed, which is not an EA, but is more of a needs study for the MTO, and it's looking at addressing the traffic into the long-term future, really from Collingwood, and the study probably extends more easterly to Barrie, but they're looking at that whole corridor as it moves from Barrie to Owen Sound. And so this is one component of that study. It recommended 5 more studies, which the MTO will move forward with at an appropriate time. The last one in the red box is the study that we're speaking about this morning, and it's this red shaded area through the Craigleith area from Gray Road 19 to Gray Road 21. We're following the municipal class EA process because there are 3 parties to this study. There's the county, the Town of Blue Mountains, and the MTO. The 3 parties got together and agreed that we would follow a municipal class EA process rather than the MTO class process. And so That's probably been a little bit interesting for the MTO. But where we're at is Phase 2. It's a Schedule C study, so Phase 2 is coming up with problem statement and conceptual solutions to the potential issues that will take place. Once we've completed this stage and selected the preferred alternatives, we will move on to Phase 3, which is more looking at specific design alternatives for each intersection that we're looking at. I'm not going to read through everything, but basically the problem statement is to deal with traffic looking into the future and how development impacts that and the impacts on Okay. This slide is really just to give some indication of the traffic projections in the top illustration without the growth, just with the existing development that's there now. And the bottom slide indicates what that growth in traffic would be. And it's projected out to 2034 and 2054. And I'll just zoom in a little bit there so that maybe you can see this graphic a little better. And so that's not going to scroll from us. So we're seeing about 11,000 vehicles per day there in 2014, expected to grow to 15,000 by 2034 and 20,000 by 2053. If we scroll down to the numbers with development, you can see that it's 15,000, 18,000, and 25,000. And as we scroll to the east, the traffic numbers grow because we're adding development traffic in. This isn't working too well, sorry. So with development traffic included, by the time we get to the east where we've added in these developments along the south side and the north side, we're getting up in the range of 29,000 vehicles per day. The current road won't handle that kind of traffic. So the MTO, one of those studies that they'll be completing at a future date will be addressing that growth in traffic and whether it results in a bypass. They predicted bypasses around Collingwood and Thornbury. They're initially talking about a 4-lane cross-section through this area, but there's also an option of looking at a bypass around this area, which will be looked at a future date with an MTO study. We're not addressing that long-term growth. It was more just to see how the development was impacting it. So to kind of make this a little more manageable, we broke the study area into 4 components based on the roads on the north and south side. So we've looked at Lakeshore Road East, which runs from Gray Road 19 across parallel with the highway and connects to the highway near Fraser Crescent. We've looked at Fraser Crescent and Blue Mountain Drive on the north side, which are small, initially cottage areas, more permanent homes being built, but 2 isolated sections there. And then you will see to the right of that graphic a proposed development here, which is the former Terrasand development. That one is on hiatus right now, but will likely be resurrected at some point in time. On the south side, Timmins Street is a little larger urban area, initially cottages, some permanent residents. Extends from west to east with 2 connections to the highway, and in the center there's a 3rd connection called Hope Street, which will align with the development to the north, the proposed Terrasand development as it develops. And the last one to the east is Brophy's Lane on the north side, which is an existing road that connects to the highway. There's a few houses on that road and then a number along the lake shore. And there are proposed connections between Brophy's Lane through this Terrasand development over to Long Point Road, which aligns with Gray Road 21. So those are the four distinct areas we've looked at. There are slides for each specific area, which I'm not going to go through today because of too much detail. But we're looking basically at closure and rerouting, which is to close an existing intersection with the highway and reroute the traffic on existing roads through existing intersections. No new alignments or new road intersections. The second alternative is closures and realigning or providing new connections at some locations. So that might apply with, say, Blue Mountain Drive at the north here. If the existing connection were closed at the highway, they could use the new subdivision roads when they're developed. Obviously, it can't be closed until the new development is in place. And the third option here, which is not a complete solution, but depending on how the development intersections are the traffic volumes, left turn lanes would be provided or right turn tapers as required. One of the key aspects of this with any of the solutions or alternatives that are presented is that because they affect a provincial highway, they have to meet provincial highway design standards. So we can't just go doing whatever we want. We have to follow MTO standards for solutions. So this is a graphic which is towards the end of the PIC, which illustrates all of the alternatives that we've are recommending in a preliminary fashion. And the reason it's preliminary is because we haven't had the PIC yet. These will be presented at the PIC as preliminary preferred solutions, but there's a period of public comment and feedback, and they may be altered somewhat based on what that public feedback is. So the main, let me just see if I can zoom in a little bit here to make this a little more, that might be a little better. So with Lake Shore on the west here, the existing intersection comes out on a curve in the highway, which limits sight lines a little bit, and it doesn't meet the separation guidelines that the MTO requires, which is a minimum of 800 meters between intersections. So we're proposing to shift that intersection a little bit to the west. So we've shown two boxes here where potential new alignments could be made for Lake Shore. The next stage of the study will determine the preferred alignment and how that impacts Lake Shore, whether there'll be a cul-de-sac on Lake Shore, or just how those connections will be made. We're also suggesting a connection between the Park Ridge development and the Eden Oaks development to facilitate east-west movements without people having to necessarily go out onto the highway. Park Ridge has two proposed connections to Lake Shore and a connection to Gray Road 19. And eventually, as this land to the east develops, there will be a connection down to Montera Road at the south here. So this connection on the east side of Eden Oak would work its way through this land. So eventually there'll be a road through that land, which right now has no specific development proposals. Fraser Crescent on the north side has two accesses to the highway. The westerly access comes out on that curve and has poor sight lines, deficient sight lines, so we're recommending closure of that access, creation of some type of a turnaround in here, and bringing that traffic out to the easterly connection. The closure would likely include an emergency access. So there would be some type of a gate structure there that would allow emergency access if the easterly access was blocked for some reason, whether it's construction or whatever. So there would continue to be an emergency access there. Blue Mountain Drive has a single access from the north. When the development to the east proceeds, this intersection could be closed and the traffic from the existing little cottage development there could travel to the east through the new development and out at the new intersection near Hope Street. The hope is that at some point in time, the traffic volumes will meet the MTO criteria for traffic signals at this intersection. And that will facilitate pedestrian crossings, cyclist crossings, as well as turning movements in and out of the developments. That, again, depends on the MTO criteria for traffic signals and the growth in the traffic. And to the east, again, if this development proceeds, we're recommending closing the existing Brophy Lane connection and directing that traffic over to Long Point Road and out to this intersection with Gray Road 21 in the highway, which, if not already, is very close to meeting the criteria for traffic signals. So we'll look at that in more detail at the next stage of the study, whether it meets that criteria now or whether it would happen, say, in the next 5 years. The other small improvement we're recommending here is with this proposed development here, that there be a connection made. The existing proposed road is going to come up very close to the property line there. There's an existing cottage road that comes up there, and we're suggesting that they be connected. There is municipal water on the existing Brophy's Lane. That would help with water main looping, and it would also help with cycling and pedestrian movements in an east-west direction and with traffic connections. And the last, well, the second last slide looks at pedestrian cyclist facilities. So the top graphic here shows pretty much the existing Georgian Trail and the existing road network. There are no specific trails, although there are designated bike lanes on Gray Road 19 from Highway 26 southerly that are designated and signed as bike lanes. Those don't exist at the current time on the easterly, on Gray Road 21. There are some informal connections between the Georgian Trail and Timmins. And there's a couple spots where people have put little footbridges over the MTO road ditches to get across either from the south to the lake or from the lake to the trail. Slide at the bottom, the graphic at the bottom, we've illustrated some potential improvements. We've suggested that the informal trail connection to Timmins be formalized through the trail committee or the town to make a permanent little, it's right now it's just a dirt path. It is municipally owned property, so they could go in there and make a connection there, which would help to connect Timmins with the trail without having to go out on the highway. We're suggesting a connection between Fraser Crescent and Blue Mountain Drive. There is an existing 5-meter wide laneway that goes through there. There's a little creek that would require a small footbridge, but there is property there that could be used. It's used as a driveway currently for a couple of homes. That could be used to connect cyclists and pedestrians. When this development proceeds, we would have connections through it over to Long Point Road and traffic, or cyclists and pedestrians would be able to use the road networks here. So there's not a lot with respect to cyclists and pedestrians. Obviously, when Hope Street, if this intersection warrants traffic signals at some point in the future, that would be a benefit for getting people from the south side to the lake and vice versa to get to the trail. We're also suggesting connection on Gray Road 21 to the Georgian Trail from the highway. And that pretty well concludes the presentation as far as recommendations. This is kind of a timeline of where we're at, spring of 2018. Once we've received the public comments, completed the PICs, we would move into the design alternatives. It's not a complete design, it's more of a conceptual design for specific solutions. There would be another public information center, another presentation to councils, and then a selection of the preferred alternative and a final environmental study report. So we're hopeful that will take place about a year from now, depending on the public comments we receive and agreement amongst the town, the county, and the MTO with respect to what the recommendations are. Okay, so I'm open for questions if there are.
Thank you for that. Any questions of Ron at this time? Councillor Fosbrook and then Councillor Eccles.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So the Public Information Center, you're referring to a location, or is that your terminology for the meeting?
That's terminology for the meeting, through the chair.
So you mentioned June, what date and what location?
Okay, so there will be a presentation to Town of Blue Mountains Council, Councilor Committee, I'm not sure, on June 4th, which is Monday. The first Public Information Center will be at Town Hall on Thursday, the 7th, June 7th. That's an evening session. And the second one will be on the Saturday, the 9th, June the 9th. Times haven't been set, but it's generally in the morning. So an evening session on a Thursday followed by a morning session on Saturday.
So-
And then the information will be presented on the website as well. It'll be accessible on the website.
Thank you. One of the later slides, and thank you for requesting that we receive this in advance. One of the later, if not your last slide, says Public Information Center number 2. So you're referring to a second meeting?
Right, so the first one is where we're at now, which
Right.
is the phase 2 of the Class EA process, where we're looking at conceptual solutions. Once we've focused in on what the preferred alternatives are, we do some design work, and we will then have a second public information session as along with presentations to council and the MTO and Town of Blue Mountains. So that is probably next winter, that second one. So there's 2 actual days in each case, a Thursday night and a Saturday morning, Thursday night and Saturday morning, but they're about a year apart.
Okay. And so just to finish up, and again, this is the last slide. So submit all comments by July 9th, 2018.
Yes. So at the PIC, we will have sheets there. We'll have all these slides out on boards that people can look at. We'll be there to answer questions. And then people can submit written comments on a form, or they can send them by email, like however they wish to communicate, preferably in writing so that there's something documenting it. And then we will take all of those comments, try to kind of consolidate them in terms of focusing on what potential issues there may be. And then with the steering committee, come to some conclusion as far as the preferred alternatives.
And so is there like one link that people can go to get additional information and
There will be.
review?
Once the presentation is completed to Town of Blue Mountains and the PICs are held, there will be a link, and probably will be on the comment form. So there'll or they can go to the Town of Blue Mountains website and it won't be right on the
Partner should
front
have a
page,
link.
but there may be a link there that's fairly accessible to you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. We'll sort out the links later. Councillor Eccles? you have a-
Thank you, Mr. Warden, through you to Mr. Kerr. Projections, you have the projections of development in the area and whatnot, and moving the traffic levels up. It's one that I always find difficult to, you're using a formula base, I take it, on today's transportation modes or movements, right? You know, this many houses, this size of a house would have 1.87 vehicles per house, whatever. And you've projected it out 2030, what was the largest number there? 26,
40 years.
2053, for 45 years. In that, you're still just using today's transportation numbers and or vehicles, right? You know, our combustible engine, or maybe even somebody thought about an electric. That doesn't take into account, you know, autonomous driven cars, anything else, new technology. How is that going to affect? Because I've been at the Blue, and you'll see pictures of people getting off trains 50, 60 years ago. We didn't have these. Well, no, I guess there was a before and after picture up there of that little dirt trail. I guess that was the before trail road. It used to be trains, and now, you know, how do we get to that visioning that this is the size of a road we're going to need? Because in 2018, this was the movement of traffic. By the time we get to 2030, everybody's going to have their little autonomous Jetson vehicle, which is available right now if you have Elon Musk type money. How do we factor that into our future planning?
Okay, so from and I'm not a traffic engineer, we have a traffic engineer on this study, but the projection to 2053 was really only to look at what is the potential fully developed area. So if all of the land develops, how much traffic might be generated on using today's methodologies. We do look at buses and alternate forms of traffic in our traffic study. Today, the conclusion is that those don't have a significant impact in terms of reducing traffic. Most traffic studies, when you get into an MTO situation, they look at a 20-year, they'll look at a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year projections. Obviously, the 5-year is more likely to be more accurate than the 20-year projection, and we would not suggest that the 2053 projections should be relied on for any purpose. They're only to illustrate that there is growth expected in traffic. As each development proceeds, they do their own traffic study, and the MTO has to approve those studies if it impacts the MTO. So there is a progressive review of the traffic projections, the types of traffic, the modes of traffic. I know Simcoe County, for example, has purchased the railway line between Collingwood and Barrie. It's not being used as an active railway, but they are maintaining that right-of-way. I'm not sure what's happened in Grey County, but they are
8 years ago, we're way ahead of them.
Yeah, so you know, there's some forward thinking in terms of, this used to be a mode of transit, and it may someday be again if the warrants are there in terms of ridership and that kind of thing. So yes, technology will change, even just things like working at home with the internet and Skype and all that affects things a little bit. People still want to go to the beach or go to the mountain. They don't want to, although maybe it'll be virtual reality in 25 years, who knows? So I don't know if that answers your question, but I agree the projections are really limited in terms of their accuracy and what you can depend on the farther you get out. I think what the town was looking for was how do we allocate costs So if these lands are gonna develop, what's their fair share of the cost of improvements, if improvements have to be made to intersections or arterial roads, that kind of thing?
Thank you for that future thinking, Councillor Eccles. Any about, John McKean, Council.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Thanks, Ron, for the presentation, and I'm sure we'll be looking forward to it when it comes down to the town of Blue Mountains, and I'm sure we're going to have a fairly full audience when you do it. If we could get maybe back to the second slide, which was kind of the overview that had a box in it that had 3 or 4 fairly wide brush alternatives for the highway. Those 4 that closer to the start. That one right there. You know, well, I think we can debate the autonomous vehicles and how much traffic there's going to be, but one thing I don't think that we need to debate is it's going to get more, not less. And, you know, I take a look at that, and particularly that block on the bottom left-hand side where it shows the 3 brown, kind of a wide swath through the countryside. And to me, that I think is what we really should be looking at, because, you know, the amount of development we're going to have at the foot of the hill, between the foot of the hill and the water, is going to be significant. And I believe that in the long term, this is what the MTO should be looking at, is to at least acquire the lands on one of those routes to be able to take that away from the South Georgian Bay shore. You know, environmentally, if we ever were to have an incident, the same as they had on 400, where 2 of those tanker trucks caught fire and the loss of life, if you have that on 26 Highway, you have no attenuation zone between that and the water. And the way the water circulates in Georgian Bay there, if we had a couple major tanker spills, we'd really impact social water protection, and especially for the town of Collingwood, and ours too, for that matter. And I think that this is, rather than spending a whole pile of money really realigning 26 Highway, this is the kind of what we have to really be looking at. And I'm not shooting the messenger here, I know what you're paid to do, but I think that we just have to come to grips with the 26 Highway as it exists today. Can't exist like that in the future. And I think if we were to look at one of those routes, you know, I don't think that we need to have widenings in 26, left turn lanes, possibly maybe even they would get away from the signalized intersections, because when you mentioned having a signalized intersection at Long Point Road and 26 Highway and then another one at Hope Street, that's a very short section, and I think that would be a significant barrier to traffic going through. So that's just a comment on my side.
Thank you, John. Councillor Ardell and then Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I echo Mayor McKean's comments as well. I made a deputation to Minister of Transportation, at AMO last August about the road widening from 4 to 5 lanes. Unless we can walk on water or make roads on water, you cannot expand the highway that much without expropriation of property on the, I'm lost on which side, but not the lakeside anyways. And it's just, you can't do 4 to 5 lanes in there. And you didn't mention anything about speed, though. You know, I know the public are wanting to drop the speed down to 50. It is 80 right now. It's supposed to be a provincial highway, but if you drop it from 50 all the way from Collingwood to Thornbury, I think that's below the 80. I know it's below the 80, but I'm just, you know, is that a provincial highway still if you're at 50 constantly? Those are one of my questions. And how much will the public have a say in this and the bearing on the decision-making for MTO?
Oh, you added in for MTO. So as I mentioned, MTO has their design guidelines and their warrants. The traffic signal at Hope, really, you're right, it impedes the flow of traffic, which is what the MTO is basically concerned with, but it would assist with pedestrian movements across the highway, because right now the only place to cross the highway is Grey Road 19 and Grey Road 21. And, but the traffic isn't there yet to warrant it, the development isn't there, so that isn't gonna happen in the near term. It would happen at some point if the development occurs and the MTO warrants are met. So if the growth in background traffic and local development grows to the point where the traffic signals are warranted, then it would go on the list with the MTO to implement at some point in time. And that can be affected by development if development contributes and that kind of thing, the timing of it. We specifically are not going to that, projecting 20, 40 years of traffic and needing a 4 and 5 lane. There will not be any mention of that in our study in terms of, it has been mentioned in the MTO studies, so there may be a reference to that, but we're not in any way sticking our foot in the door saying this is happening or not. The lobbying that took place when the MTO completed this needs assessment, this one at the bottom here, they came up with a solution which showed these bypasses around Collingwood and around Thornbury and recommended a 4-lane or 5-lane cross-section through this black section through Craigleaf. There were, from the town and from residents, comments made, and so they've added this dashed line as an alternate route for consideration when they do a future study. So this, the one that's outlined in the green box here was what they refer to as a needs assessment. So they were kind of projecting what is needed here in the long term. That specific report came up with these concepts, but it recommended 5 more studies. So those would be individual environmental assessments, and they may be breaking it into kind of the East End, the Collingwood, the Craigleaf, the Thornbury. So they have recommended further studies. So nothing is written in stone. There's still going to be public consultation when the MTO does those studies. This study, I guess what the MTO was interested in was to make sure we don't eliminate options by saying you can't build a 4-lane highway or you can. So we're not making any comments about that corridor capacity. We're really just looking at how the intersections impact. Obviously, closing intersections in the MTO's view helps traffic flow. But you don't want to close 3 intersections at Timmins and have them all come out at Hope, and you're bringing all that out at one with stop signs. So we've said those intersections remain until there are signalized intersection at Hope Street. It is close. I think it meets the 800-meter separation criteria that the MTO wants, but traffic signals will also help to slow down traffic, which, when you mention speed, is something that people are concerned about. There are slides in the full presentation that deal with speed limit, but the MTO didn't consider speed limit a solution that we could consider as an alternative. There's discussion about it, but they have a process for evaluating speeds, and there'll actually be a handout at the PIC that explains their process for that. And so that can happen at any time. It doesn't require an environmental assessment to change the speed limit. It requires convincing the MTO.
Thank you for that.
Oh, sir, can I have a supplement to that? So a few years back, we had about 1.5 million in tourism, and then it went to 2, and now I just got reports back, it's 2.5 million visitors. So it seems to be every year we're going up again. So have they even taken that into consideration where maybe 2020, we're going to be having 4 million people coming to the Blue Mountains, and that using that corridor, and just Park Bridge is coming in June to get moving along with their development. So you've got, I forget how many units in there, but if everybody's got 2 and 3 cars, you've got about 600 people. It's a lot of traffic just in that small area. And we've talked about an overpass and coming around the mountain, but Collingwood doesn't want to divert traffic. They're very bent on putting everybody in their downtown core, and instead of getting them where they need to go. And even this county council here, turned down signs to having people go over the mountain. And it's, having everybody just drive through Collingwood, and that's what they're doing. They're driving everybody through there, and then they get lost. They either go to the mountain or you go around 26, and it's brutal. Coming home on a Friday night or, any night, it's very slow. And I'm just wondering if they, have taken all of this into consideration, the amount of people, the amount of development that's going to be happening very shortly. And there's other development happening around the mountain too. These aren't just the four of them. There's many. So I was just wondering if they have considered all of this.
So there's a couple of things. 8 or 10 years ago, there was a locally driven study completed for the MTO that recommended some temporary bypass. This was before the 4-lane highway was built. And so it comes out Poplar Side Road. There was some around Stayner using county roads. And so there has been an attempt at a local level to kind of divert some of that traffic. So the people know where they're going. They can follow those alternate routes. They're not designated, bypasses in the sense of MTO or anything like that. But I think that's helped a little bit with, say, downtown Collingwood. I think downtown Collingwood's got limits on how much traffic they can, and if people are up at Blue and they want to go to a restaurant in Collingwood, they know where they are and they know how to get there. So how that will develop through, the Craigleaf area, through Blue Mountains, over the mountain, obviously requires a lot more study than what we're looking at. But we acknowledge that there are other things coming. That the traffic study is based largely on the development. I'm not sure if it really takes into account, it does take into account tourism in a sense that there's a factor put in for what's called background growth. So if you assume there was no traffic at all, or no development at all, the traffic's going to continue to grow, and that's partly your tourism and maybe growth in other areas. But so there's that background growth plus the development growth, and so both of those are taken into account in the traffic modeling.
Those are good answers, thank you. Councilor Ardell, you?
Nope, that's fine, thank you.
You'll be part of the PIC, so Councilor McQueen.
I'll try to be brief, and I know we could talk about this probably all day, but I know that 26 is a very, very busy road. You try turning against traffic, especially on a weekend, and you might wait 15 or 20, who knows how long. Especially where that bus accident was down just north of Stayner there in the wintertime. I come out there quite often to go to my uncle's farm, and you wait and wait and wait and wait, and you just can't get out there. Are you changing the maps? I think you said about future studies, and I think, Ron, that I think that's something that really needs to happen with regards to maybe a joint study between the County of Grey and maybe the lower tier and the MTO. You get a lot of people filing up 124 that dump into Collingwood. You get a lot of people coming up from Stayner that go through because, if you're heading to Thornbury, you're heading to Meaford, do you want to go through that slow section of 26? You absolutely do not want to go there. So you come up, there's options 119, the proposed County Road, Simcoe County Road 91, that's proposed to be closed, which they haven't found a solution yet to doing that. There's a lot of things, 24, they come up through 2 into the Blue Mountains, they come up 13. I mean, we had a public meeting last night with regards to development in Markdale, and there was suggestion that we got to look for the future of Highway 10 being a 4-lane highway to Owen Sound. So, that was just a comment that was made. It was an engineer comment, but it was a comment that was made. I mean, we do have an area that is growing and growing and growing, and we're going to have to deal with this traffic, not in a piecemeal part, but in a big way. So I don't know, maybe the next term of county council can, start to work with the MTO and all the other players, because the traffic is getting busier and busier and busier. And it gets to the point where, who would think you have bottleneck in this neighborhood? But it's coming, it's there now. So, and then you got safety and you got all the other issues with, where's the future traffic patterns, or even from our county perspective. I know we did the transportation master plan there, was it 3.5, 4 years ago now? We had some numbers. There's just, everybody's coming to that area. And we're going to have to deal with it in a big way, not just in a piecemeal. I'll leave those comments at that.
Thank you, Councillor McQueen. Yes, Councillor Bell, you have,
Yeah, real quickly, Mr. Warden. The information at the public meetings, will there be a list of the buildings that would have to probably be demolished and the millions of dollars worth of real estate that would have to be purchased to put a highway of this significance through that area?
We're not addressing this future study that the MTO has to do as far as property or anything like that. If we needed a bit of property to make a left turn lane, we're not sure at this point, but the next step would tell us that. It won't be any major significant, and this study wouldn't authorize any significant property acquisition. It would be a very localized, if at all, would be very localized relative to the intersection. So, for example, at Lakeshore, if we realign that intersection, there is going to be property involved there, but it's a small component, and right now it's vacant, the areas we've designated.
thank you for that.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
It's evolution, not revolution. and-
This box at the bottom, the green box where the MTO, I think, addresses Councillor McQueen's comment a little bit about an overview. The MTO, I mean, it's a slow process, but there is a study there that was completed in October of 2015. It's available, not sure if it's on the township or the town website, but it is available, and it does address, like, it's trying to identify what are the future needs of the area, and they're looking long-term, and that's why they've conceptually shown these bypasses around Collingwood and Thornbury. So if anybody's interested to look at that study, or even the executive summary, and it lists the studies that they need to do. So in terms of moving forward, it may be worth looking at those 5 studies and approaching the MTO about, okay, how can we get this particular one implemented or started, kind of thing.
Thank you. Councillor McKean, you're going to point us to these studies, are you?
Well, I'm just going to, I guess, carry on with the regional part. If you take a look at that checkered line there, and there's a little blue dot about halfway across that, that's County Road 19, and that's Castle Glen. And when that develops, there's going to be 1,800 units on that site, and so you're going to be talking about a community about the size of Stainer on the side of that hill. And that's going to be on a county road where it could be right on the bypass going into Collingwood. So, as I said, it all comes down to, I get back to Councillor Bell's comment about the $1 million houses. If you're going to have a plan, you better acquire the land while it's still vacant land, rather than, as you say, demolishing $2 million houses, because that becomes pretty unpalatable. If you have any idea you're going to do it, at least gather up the swath of land that you have to have. And I know that, as I said, Ron's, we appreciate that's a study for another time.
Right.
But that's a real regional approach to that.
Well, this has been an ongoing study, and it's, it's a partnership, and Grey County's watching its position as a partner as well. So I think we've had a good round on this, and I thank you, Ron, for bringing us up to date on that, and I'm sure that if anybody's interested, they'll go to the June meetings that are being held in the town of Blue Mountains. So that being said, thank you very much for attending.
Lunch is here.
Yeah, let's.
Okay.
So we could ring the dinner bell. It's here. So we were going to have to come back anyhow. So we do have. So let's break for lunch, and then we can go. Come back and finish up some of the other items that are still open. Thank you. All right, we'll call this meeting back to order. Everyone is seated. Heather is going to be make this presentation, and I'm going to ask that report CCR CWO 515 be received regarding the delegation of duties, and that the updated delegation of duties policy and schedule as amended be endorsed, and a bylaw be brought forward for council's consideration. Put that on the floor. Councillor Klumpus, seconded by Councillor Pringle. Thank you. Heather.
Thank you, Warden Halliday. It is a lengthy, it's a short report, but a lengthy schedule to go with it. So what I'd like to do, with your indulgence, is just go through some of the highlights. The delegation of duties schedule has been updated to reflect changes in our governance structure over the last year. as well as some legislative changes and some streamlining of operations to provide further efficiencies in our day-to-day operations. I have tried to highlight all of the changes for your ease of reference, and the portions to be deleted have been indicated through a strikeout. There was a request from the CAO Evaluation Committee to add general duties and powers of the CAO as outlined in her job description to the delegation of duties. This will provide for a continuous overall operation of the county in efficient and effective manner. And this is something that a lot of municipalities have, and it just wasn't in ours. So that was a recommendation that came out of that committee. There's been an influx of grants recently, and in order to begin implementation of certain projects, for example, RED funding, a change is recommended to allow the acceptance of grants under $50,000 as long as there are no unbudgeted funds required from the county levy, with no staff report required. Our community partnerships are continuing to grow, and therefore our agreements between parties for use of our property and us use of their property are also growing. Oftentimes there are minimal costs associated with these rental agreements. I know Social Services rents the Hanover Lawn Bowling for, I think, $125. The rental of areas for the Warden's Forum, et cetera, are minimal as well. And it's therefore recommended that this process be streamlined to include rental costs under $5,000 under the departmental responsibility. New rules under the Assessment Review Board require that the county assign a representative for both complaints and appeals that go to that board. It's recommended that this be delegated to the Treasurer, Kevin Wepler. With Council's endorsement of the sale of the Westmount properties, when they become vacant, it's recommended that the warden and clerk be authorized to sign these transfer agreements as they're currently under the Housing Corporation, Ontario Housing Corporation. They should have been transferred to the county at devolution in 2001. This was not done, so we want to be able to transfer the land titles to the county prior to any sale. And those sales will happen just as the units come available. Changes within the planning section to the extension timeframes for draft plans of condominiums and subdivisions from 12 months to 3 years, including minor exemptions. If that's supported from the local municipality, it's recommended that this be delegated to our Director of Planning, Randy Schertzer. There are also some other minor administrative changes that have been added or changed to reflect our current environment. The Director of Finance title has been changed to his statutory role as the Treasurer. Title changes and a note of changes moving from standing committees to the Committee of the Whole. What I will note is that Kevin Wepler brought to my attention this morning an error in the delegation of duties schedule. So I'm going to just bring your attention to that, and that's under 1.10. And the update to coincide with the purchasing procedure was not captured under the reporting requirements and restrictions. And what it should read is that authority granted to award $250,000 net HST, except for items budgeted between $100,000 and $250,000, where the total annual cost exceeds the budgeted amount by more than 10%. If a multi-year contract exceeds $250,000, the Committee of the Whole must award. And under rationale, quarterly reports for awards over $25,000 and under $250,000 will be provided to Committee of the Whole. And I apologize that we have the correct purchasing procedure there. The numbers under the rationale or the reporting requirements were not caught during the review of this schedule. Otherwise, there are just some minor changes that I've noted in the report. Another minor one is the nuisance beavers. Right now, they have to come to the county if they're from outside of Grey County, to become a trapper under the county bylaw. As everyone I'm sure around the table is aware, they're few and far between. The number of trappers are shrinking substantially, so we would like to delegate that authority to the Director of Planning to allow those trappers to come and trap on county lands. I think that's it for the highlights, so I'm happy to answer questions from council.
Questions? Councillor Wright?
Thank you very much, and this is just, I'm just asking for information, I guess. Under, in the very beginning, the move to allow acceptance of grants under 50,000, we put an amount of money in our budget, and we do have a policy on what sort of grants we allow, I believe. Is that right? Through you, Warden, to the clerk, if you can answer that. I mean, we don't just...
Have you got a specific reference on this list here, like,
Yeah.
like 1.1, or are you just asking a general question?
I'm just asking if there is a policy that says what is grantable and what isn't. I mean, we just,
Granting out from,
yeah, we just don't give money away to everybody.
no, we wouldn't do that. But anyhow, I think Heather can deal with that, and along with our
That
treasurer
would
if
be
need
fine,
be.
thank you.
Under 1.12, which I think is what you're referring to, Councillor Wright, that is actually us accepting grants. So accepting grants from the ministries, federal and provincial grants, those types of things. Anything that, and Kevin can speak to that, any grant requests that come through us, they go to finance for evaluation and come to committee or are included in the budget.
Okay, so you're only dealing with those portions, you're not dealing with anything that just happens to come in asking for money?
Correct.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, cover that up. Any other questions? Councillor Eccles?
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and it is the last one that's in there. It's the delegation of duties for us sending individuals on a training session to a third party. And I'm a little confused. We have paramedics that receive training. A lot of the public works or transportation individuals are going out, training on different equipment here, there. What brings this up? What is different on this than sending somebody to Toronto to fire college?
Absolutely. So through you, Mr. Warden, these are where we are required to sign an agreement with the third party, so land forces, could be the Conservation Authority for rope training at Ingalls Falls, for example. So this is where we are required to sign an agreement to allow our staff to go and use their facilities for training purposes. That's all this covers, is just where we are requested to sign an agreement to use third-party facilities.
Cover your request?
Well, I guess kind of, but we send people on training on agreements. So I'm struggling.
So general training is covered under the purchasing policy in that that's exempt from that. But this is specifically when the county has to enter as a legal entity into an agreement with a third party to allow our staff to go and use their facilities for training.
Okay, yeah.
And you're referencing 419, is that the last very?
Yeah, that's where it is.
Okay, so it refers to Director of Paramedic Services. Okay.
I guess, does that, it references the paramedic services, but that's the generic one that's in there.
We have one in for paramedic services, but we also have one specifically for use of county properties and the county using third party as well. But the Director of Paramedic Services requested the rope training as an example for their paramedic services because they do probably more than most of our departments at off-site locations where they do require the county to enter into a legal agreement.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Fossbrook?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So, not unlike the procedural bylaw, I think this is a very, very important bylaw and policy. And I wonder if it doesn't warrant an actual workshop in itself. Because just to talk about one item, I think that there's a number of items, and I'm prepared to identify a few, that I think if we did discuss, that there might be some variance in interpretation, if you will. So when I looked at the delegation bylaw on the website, I noted that the schedule is not attached. So the changes that have been made from the previous schedule are identified here with lines and whatnot, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So there seems to be, so as an example, 3.15, Declaration of Compliance. So I didn't see, like, is that in the former schedule?
Yes, it's under 3.12, and there's a strikeout there under including declaration of compliance, and it's been moved to its own now, because we now have a committee of management, and in discussions with the director of long-term care, the chair of that committee and the director would then have the signatory and the signing responsibility for that. So that was included in there under 12, and it's been moved to sit by itself.
Okay. So I have a number of questions, and I am going to spare everybody at the moment. I think that this should be a workshop. I believe that I'm interpreting the legislation correctly, wherein we can delegate, but that does not alleviate our accountability. And to me, it becomes critically important not to just understand what we're delegating and quantifying it clearly, but having reporting protocols that support our ability to ensure that we are in fact accountable. So I could go on and on, I don't want to go on. I guess I'm looking for some sense of, do you think that that would be inappropriate? Because I believe that this could have been an important part of the orientation of the new council as well, so.
No disrespect to your comments. I think it's, you've taken this to a level that would probably require, because this is a committee of the whole, require perhaps a meeting with the clerk and the CEO to go over your concerns and see whether or not they can be clarified before it comes back to county council for approval at the next meeting. Would you be willing to look into that? I know the staff would work with you on that.
If I may?
Yes.
I would prefer that this be a discussion with everybody, but if that's not an option, then fine.
Well, perhaps it can roll into, further, if there's any changes, it can roll into, further discussion. But I think at this point in time, I think the staff need to identify what your concerns are. So I thank you for understanding that, I can work with you to try and come up with a solution before the next council meeting. And if it need be, we'll make adjustments. That satisfy you?
Not really, but thank you.
Okay, well.
I
you let
appreciate it,
You let
but
us,
not
you
really.
let us know then via email if you have concerns that we are specific. And if you want to have a meeting, we'll certainly arrange a meeting. Thank you for that. Okay, any other questions on this particular bylaw? Multi-parted, that it is. Doesn't seem to be raising much interest here, so we'll ask that the motion be called, and all in favor. Thank you very much. So we'll go back now to earlier things that have been pulled from the consent agenda. And and so we'll ask that each one of these pieces be brought forward for approval. That C is that the revised pupil accommodation review guideline from the Ministry of Education be received for information. Put that on the floor, please. Councillor Hicks, Councillor Ardell, on the floor, discussion. Councillor Fosbrook.
Thank you. I just simply wanted to, again, talk about how, when we refer to the education sector as a separate silo, do our school board trustees have what I would equate to as an open invitation to come to council at any time and talk about educational issues? Because we recently had our trustee come to our lower tier council, and I encouraged him to come more often. So I haven't seen any delegation presentation from representation from the Ministry of Education in our term, so I wonder.
A good question. Anybody that has a reasonable request can certainly come. I would probably think that it would be a good idea for the representatives for Grey County to, but I'm not sure whether that's in their mandate, but we'll certainly discuss that further. Any other questions on it? Councillor Ardell.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. This document that we received on April 27th, when you read through it, it'll be on the final page, which is page 4, under the Urban Student Accommodation Engagement. I've highlighted it in my copy here, but in urban areas experiencing rapid growth and intensification, which will include education development charges. So that brought up a question at our EDAC, which is our Economic Advisory Committee. And we have the Georgian Triangle Development Institute, and the president, Ken Hale, had brought to my attention that in Collingwood, there's an apartment complex that is being ready to be built, has had all the approvals and is ready to go. And what's happened is now with the educational charges in Simcoe County, that's going to add an additional $500,000 in development charges to that new build. So the DCs, education DCs, are going to be moving from $1,759 to $5,064 per residential unit. Now, we're very lucky here. I had a conversation with the Director of Finance, Rob Cummings, who is at our Blue Water, and for our area, Grey and Bruce, we do not have any educational development charges, because if they did, it would be affecting our town, because we have rapid growth and all the developments. And Rob went, oh yeah, because he used to be our treasurer. So he was quite aware of what was happening. So it comforted me to know that we do not have any, but it doesn't comfort me to know that Simcoe County now, with these development charges being brought through, it's still in the debating, 5 mayors from Simcoe County, along with the Georgian Triangle Development Institute, appeared before their board last week and pleaded their case, because that's going to shut down development. And this is for attainable housing. So when this happens, what they're going to do is they're just going to really, put the development charges onto the consumers. And so now you're not going to have attainable housing. We need attainable housing in all of our areas, our encatchment, the South Georgian Bay area, because we need workers. We have a shortage of a workforce, and bringing these people. So this is just going to interfere and stop development. And the amount of money and this money is not going to be used in Collingwood that they're gathering. They're going to send this money down to Bradford, where they said they need some school lands, that they don't need any more school lands in the Collingwood area. So I'm just bringing it to your attention, and I'll keep you informed, because I'm looking for a resolution from one of the 5 mayors, which will be circulated to OSAM and then to AMO, just to help them out, because I think that's quite a jump. 1,759 to 5,064. That's a good way to shut down housing.
Well, thank you for that heads up. Both Grey County and Bruce County haven't taken that up, and it's a public process to do DC charges. I know the CAO may have some comments on that.
Randy may have more information as well. From what I understand, this is a board-driven process. This is very separate and distinct from the development charges and the background study that we as a municipality would put together. School boards are encouraged to include stakeholders in their discussion regarding the imposition of education development charges in their jurisdiction. And it goes on at some length about what that stakeholder participation should look like. The ministry recommends that boards work closely with coterminous boards when developing a submission. coterminous boards imposing charges in the same area should agree on the data and assumptions used in the calculation of the respective charges. So I think it's just something that we need to stay on top of. And I have not heard anything. Have you? No?
No, we're not aware of that, that our school boards anyways are wanting to look at development charges at this time. They do have the ability to do so, and, but at this stage, we haven't heard if there's any interest from our school boards to look at applying a development charge.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the heads up. Councillor Barfoot, who represents the Canadian School Alliance,
Thanks, Mr. Warden.
probably have some updates on this.
Well, in all honesty, I was going to say this accommodation review document is the biggest piece of hodgepodge garbage you've ever seen in your life. It has changed so many times. You have to have version 1 to 18 because they keep changing. I'm waiting for our next conference call with the Community School Alliance, which Doug Raycraft is our chair. Doug analyzes this stuff to a T, so I'm waiting for the Coles Notes version from Doug to come back with what was recommended from our group, whether they accepted those or not. And the last I talked to Doug personally on it, some of the ideas they were looking to incorporate. So in fairness, I think until we actually get a report back from that group would be a more of a Coles Notes version as to what's happened on this part.
Okay, I'm sure you'll keep us apprised of what's happening, and thanks for those comments. We are receiving it for information. Paul McQueen, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. To follow up with Councillor Barfoot in the sense that Doug has certainly been on top of this in a big way, and he did a presentation at OSUM down in Niagara Falls last week, and I was going to, through you, Mr. Warden, maybe through Councillor Ardell, if that, when it is public, to be circulated to all of County Council, because he did do a good presentation that morning, and he did speak about the highlights of it, and one is an economic development plan is now required. There's an extended time frames and stuff like that. So he said there were some wins and there were some loses, but there has been a bit of a movement of this newer document, so and that sort of thing. So through you, Mr. Ward, maybe if, I know, I'm not sure when that's going to be released, through you, Mr. Ward, to the Councillor Dale, when those documents will be released, but he did a great job.
Thank you. Councillor Ardell will make us aware. Any other questions on this? All right, that being said, all in favor of receiving this report for information? Motion is carried.
Just a note of comment, Mr. Warden, it did come out like at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
So those favorite time zones. So the next one is that the Ontario Good Roads Association 2018 delegation response from the Ministry of Transportation be received for information. Put that on the floor. Councillor Fosbrook, seconder. Councillor Pringle. Comments as you pulled it, Councillor Fosbrook? Just.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So the transportation issues that were discussed at the Good Roads Association, the brief submission that was given to the minister, is that something that is a public document? Has that been published?
It is a public document.
We haven't distributed it. We don't normally.
Everybody got a copy before we did.
Oh, well, okay, so Councillor Pringle may want to comment on it. I think probably I don't know whether Pat wants to summarize what our approach was, but I'll let Councillor Pringle speak first.
My understanding of it, Councillor Fosbrook, is it has not come before County Council yet, so it is not a public document. It was a brief that was prepared by staff here and presented, but it was not a document that every county councillor had seen. And that was kept out of the press as well. They did a follow-up, and I know in talking to Pat, he didn't want to make too many comments for the right reasons, that it was not a public document at that time.
That verified that's. CEO says that's the case, but anyhow, so we really can't comment on the lack of comments from the province then? Okay, thank you.
So, if I may, on the topic of delegations, I understand that AMO's opened the door for delegations at this time. Is that correct?
Going forward, yes.
Yeah. And I find it a little early, which is good. So I just want to reiterate how I'm quite interested in making sure that we're ahead of the curve. If there's a first come, first served principle, that we get our initiatives in there and get the briefs all put together so that everybody in this room
Right.
can in fact participate and agree on what will be submitted and discussed.
Well, bookmark that for June the 15th, and we probably knows what's happening there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Receive that information. All in favor of that report? Thank you. The number E is that the local transit and intercommunity bus project funding correspondence from the Ministry of Transportation be received for information. Put that on the floor. Councillor Fosbrook, seconder by Councillor John McKean. Discussion.
So simply a heads up that the SMART Board at our most recent meeting had a discussion about tentatively considering expanding the mandate of SMART to include individuals 65 plus who not necessarily are physically or otherwise impaired. So that information is floating around out there, and I just wonder how much correspondence and communication our staff has here with SMART, and if we're all managing where this is all going in the big picture as well and effectively as possible.
Well, thanks for that question. I know the CEO's trying to get some specifics, and right now we just got a promise, but maybe Kim has some.
I have not received correspondence, nor have I heard from my colleague directors from SMART in a very long time. So if there's further information that we might consider when we're trying to develop a plan for the county's resources, that would be useful to hear from them.
Yeah, it's good to keep that, us aware of where SMART might want to go, and then we don't know exactly what our grant will allow us to do. So, if there's an opportunity there.
I had an inkling there might be room for improvement in communication, so I'm just communicating that others can communicate to improve that.
Right, I know there are other members of the SMART Board here as well, so.
Thank you.
Thank you for that update. Any other comments on that? Thank you for bringing those forward. All in favor of this motion? The motion is carried. So, going back to the,
Administration.
yes, Anne Marie, you're going to tell us where we're at.
So our roof is complete, which is great. There's just a few little things to be done around with the parapets and whatnot. Downstairs, we're looking at some millwork, carpet and painting, and same with the provincial offenses court. So basically brings us to the last 3 to 4 weeks of the build. Outside, we still have landscaping. That'll continue to be done for the summer. Starting next week, there will be some landscaping happening on site.
So the occupancy permit will occur when,
When all that's done. So probably, not when the outside, just when the inside's
Right.
done. So we're probably looking at sometime beginning of June by the time we have all of our inspections and
All right.
whatnot done.
so we'll keep the warden's breakfast in the
You bet.
refrigerator, and then we'll bring it out when you're ready then. Okay? Thanks, Anne Marie, for that. Any questions of Anne Marie? Yes, Councillor Pringle.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Anne Marie, what was the final verdict for this stairway? I know there was some discussion. Can you explain what is going to happen there?
Well, that was part of our build committee. We had talked about, when we originally did the build, we were asked to keep the arches, which we've done, to keep the wooden staircase, and to also keep the original terrazzo in the other area. But one of the things that we wanted to do was possibly get rid of the staircase. It does need a little bit of work. We did reach out through the contract for a quote, and we just thought, I think the build committee at that time thought the quote was a little too high. So once the contract's done, we'll come back with some other options and look at if there's savings in the build being put towards that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a good update. Yes, Councillor Barfoot.
So are we looking to do like a grand opening then?
Certainly it'll be grand, absolutely.
So
When, to be decided, early June, but.
Yeah, I know that, I think for the warden's breakfast, we were thinking that we would provide some tours. POA courts may be the only area that may not be complete by that time, but everything else should be. So that would be tours happening there, and then certainly, I think, looking at something public.
And we may, you can hear me okay. It may be that a more official kind of grand opening of the thing might be better once they get sod laid at the front and that sort of thing. So, I mean, we're just at a funny time this year. Timelines got pushed back because of the weather and whatnot, but that's sort of what we're thinking of.
I'm sure that looking forward to a chrome shovel that we can hang in the hall. Thank you. Through the chair, right? Thanks, Anne Marie. And thanks for the comments from the Owen Sound there. Next is number 9, other business. Do we have any other business that should be brought forward? Did I miss you, or you got new business, Mr. Councillor McQueen? Other business you can have.
Warden, just regards to the upcoming management meeting of long-term care. I understand that there's a report coming forward with an operational review of the homes. Any idea when that date of that is?
Yes, the CEO is tracking that.
If I may, we had originally thought that we would have the operational review report to the May meeting of the Long-Term Care Committee for a number of reasons, some of which have been, I think, talked about in the media. Our Sienna folks were pulled away to out west, and they've asked that we bring the operational review report forward at the meeting on June the 12th.
The management meeting,
Yes.
which then will come to council, is that suspected to come to council?
Likely then would probably come to council on the 26th, or 28th, sorry. Yeah.
Is it an open document?
The operational review, I would expect so. Not having seen it, I don't, it's difficult for me to say if there might be things in there that we would want to keep confidential, but
Right.
certainly I would expect that the bulk of it would be.
Okay. And my other question is following today's decision on the, carrying on with the decision of last June, what next? Is that going to be talked about, I guess, at that management committee? Steady as you go?
I would expect that would be an appropriate thing for the committee to talk about once they've had a chance to look at the recommendations.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other business? No, I seeing none. Oh, yes. Seeing none. No. Well, notice of motion first. Any notice of motions? Councillor Fosbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. More than anything, I just need to clarify, and then you can tell me if I need a notice of motion. So, last year, I brought a notice of motion looking for staff to bring back a report identifying the benefits, challenges, and estimated costs of proceeding with video and audio recording of all council, committee of the whole, task forces, and other committee and advisory committee meetings. Subsequent to that, we did pass a resolution, and even I was remiss in identifying that the resolution was limited to council and committee of the whole. It was my intention that any meetings that take place in this building could and should take place in these chambers, and that we would video record them. And so, do I need to bring another notice of motion to reiterate that?
Well, if you're really seeking clarification, I guess so, but I think it was really relating to our council meetings. But I could stand corrected here, so CEO, you have a comment on that?
I would just add that the issue of video recording and making those recordings available publicly requires us to have captioned them. And I think has been recognized in earlier discussions about this, it's something that requires quite a lot of manual intervention. If you want to move in the direction of recording everything, then everything will need to be transcribed. And just given the amount of Rob's time that it's taking to do council and committee of the whole, this starts to look like another person. And we've talked about whether or not there are other ways to handle this or, better technology that might take some of that work away. But I just wanted you to be aware that we are required to close caption, and it's a significant piece of work to get it done. So,
Well, it's the first I hear of it, so I appreciate the information, and I'm sure that there are other municipalities that have the same challenge. I'd be interested to see how they're addressing it, but thank you for that.
Yeah, there's accessibility systems and people out there that are looking at a lot of things that need to be changed on, even on agenda reports. So I think that's a separate subject, but thank you for bringing that up, and we'll keep it on the radar. So also it's Tara Warder, our deputy clerk. I'd like her to stand for a little bit of a round of applause because this is her last day. And we thank you very much for her dedication. And she stepped up into the deputy clerk role just recently, and now she's off for becoming a mother. So I want to congratulate her. So Tara, please stand, and we'll give you a round of applause.
Mr. Warden, do we have a pool on the status of the weight and the sex of the child?
Well, Las Vegas is looking after that. So, however, Jacqueline Morrison, who I think was introduced last time, sitting in my empty chair today, will then move over to this side, and she's on a one-year contract with us, and we welcome her to our county. Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Burley.
Motion to adjourn.
We can accept that, and we are now adjourned.
Seconder.